Hello everyone, welcome back. Hope you're having a good week. There have been several articles coming out with Zack Snyder interviews this week to, of course, promote Rebel Moon, and I want to cover a couple of highlights from some of those articles. If you're new to the channel, thank you for checking it out, and if you enjoyed this video and the other content I post, consider subscribing, and if you're a new subscriber, shout out to you, thank you. So, of course, I'm not going to go through and read these articles. The Hollywood Reporter one, they're always, super long. So I just want to cover some of the highlights from the Hollywood Reporter article that came out today and Wired, which I read yesterday. So there are some similarities and kind of parallels between the two articles. Interestingly, both of them point out a lot of the cool stuff in Zack Snyder's office and his setup. So that was a cool thing to see him. Some of the descriptions of his memorabilia and just things that he has around his office. If you read both of the articles, you might have noticed that. In the Wired article, he talks a little bit about Rebel Moon's lead character, Cora, played by Sofia Boutella, and the question is, Rebel Moon also has a strong female lead, Cora, this former soldier, who is she to you? He says the movie is not a naive fantasy. She's a soldier. The trauma of being a soldier is a big part of who she is, and the trauma is really a lot of what shapes her. She's a powerful female character, but she does have a lot of flaws. In this case, she's got a lot to discover about herself. She's powerful, she's savvy in the universe, but emotionally, that's where she needs to grow. When asked if she does grow, he responds, there is this whole thing of her feeling unworthy of redemption, but she has a taste of it and she gets to this place where she can live a life. So that's a little bit of background about what to expect from Cora. Talking about finding Rebel Moon's home at Netflix, he said they understood from the beginning, oh, you're going to want to do a director's cut. The director's cut was a prerequisite for making the movie for the first time ever, so my joy at making the 2-hour PG-13 version was much greater, and that's an interesting point. We know Zack has over the years kind of become known for having director's cuts of most of his movies, so it's cool that they laid that out at the beginning. Like, if you want me to do a 2-hour PG-13 version, I'm only going to do it if I get my director's cut, and so it's cool that they were in agreement with that. Continuing with that, is there maybe an even advantage to having that separate PG-13 version? That's an interesting question. Zack responded, it allowed the R-rated version to be more out there. It's an interesting mythological sort of place that I have found for myself. The way I make the movies now is that I have this concept of the director's cut. I think nearly every movie I've done, except for Man of Steel, has a director's cut, maybe 2 director's cuts, unlike my friends who make movies. And then they were like, who are you talking about? And he said Chris Nolan, maybe Todd Phillips. And he mentioned those are people that he kind of, talks to, which we've known that since Man of Steel, they've had a very strong relationship and support each other a lot. Christopher Nolan played a big part in getting the Snyder Cut released as well. So, and he's always been very supportive of Zack's DC universe. And I like this point here that he talks about how he's cultivated this other system where he, in a lot of ways, with the director's cut, he's asked for more than I have any business asking for. He said, I realized that there was a commodity in just, what I really wanted to do, and then I do that. It's been my experience that all the director's cuts I've ever done are considered better movies than the theatrical versions. Critics or whoever, they're just like, yeah, the director's cut is better, which I think we've seen that pattern. Obviously, there's definitely been a pattern with that. Just within DC, his, BVS, Zack Snyder's Justice League, but he's also done a couple different cuts for Watchmen, so speaking of Justice League, of course, he reminds us that he's never seen the theatrical Warner Brothers cut of Justice League, which we've known about. He said, I've heard a lot about it. My wife was forced to watch it. Poor Deborah. I feel like it was probably so difficult for her and Christopher Nolan to sit there and watch that together. And we remember they said they made the promise that they would never let Zack see it. And I think that was admired that a lot about the two of them. I know he's heard a lot about it, but I think to sit there and watch it, and then everything that was going on at the time would just make it so much worse. When talking about how people kind of respond to his films, the interviewer said, you're clearly trying to unsettle people with your work. And he said, I am. I love it. I believe the most satisfying sort of cinematic journey is the one that you don't expect. It's the turn you didn't see coming. It's being a little uncomfortable or being taken to a place that you wouldn't normally get to. And he's definitely made his stamp in movies with that approach. And I think I appreciate it. I think it makes things more interesting, like he says, and a little bit more shocking and unexpected. He kind of takes it with the approach of, how do I trick the system? You have to game it. If you don't, you end up with nothing. You end up really having to bury your soul. You just rip your heart out. Then you put it on the auction block. You put your movie out. It becomes a consumer product. You yourself become a consumer product. That's the thing that I think can be really difficult for filmmakers that's the price of the transaction. That can be painful. And he kind of talks about, he uses some similar, has a similar comment in the Hollywood Reporter article, as well as becoming, making a product. In talking about letting go of DC, Justice League, etc., he said the most cathartic thing was Justice League. My Justice League experience was the hardest in what was happening with me personally and what was happening professionally. All of it was really painful and difficult and made me wonder about the why of the whole thing. Like, what's the end game? This part of the article was pretty emotional for me reading it. There was a real crisis. Like, I was trying to make something as best I can. I was called upon for a skill set, but in the end, there was all the second guessing. Also in my personal life, I'm confronted with probably the most painful thing I can think of. He said that during post-production, which is when they lost Autumn, I found no solace in the work. He said the life I created for myself was of no comfort to this other experience. If you're honest with ourselves in what we pursue, we hope that pursuit will have some catharsis for us in the struggles that we have in our lives. And I just think that that was the darkest time because I felt like I turned to the thing that I love and it turned its back on me as well. And I felt like that was a really deep comment considering that whole situation. And they asked him, do you mean the work wasn't giving you solace, or are you referring to your relationship with the studio? And he's honest. He said, I think it might have been the studio, but it was also the work itself. Where I was with the project and my relationship with the studio, that experience offered me nothing. Any kind of healing was impossible, and so therefore I had no interest in continuing with it. That was a real break for me. You live under this illusion that your art and the way you express yourself is kind of the therapy that you can always rely on, and then when the rubber hits the road, you're like, oh, it's not helpful at all. So I think, not just finishing the movie, but like if the studio, like the relationship with the studio made it 1,000 times worse, right? To deal with all of that. I'm glad that he was honest about that, because it's unimaginable how that must have been. When asked what actually brought him back to movie making, he said the fan movement of wanting to know what Justice League was supposed to be, that was cathartic, because the making of Justice League was the exact same thing that had betrayed me, and then being able to dedicate the movie to Autumn. So that was, I felt like a really beautiful way of saying that. And in both of these articles, he is asked about the extreme fandom. He said, look, there's tons of toxic fans. I don't condone that behavior, but I appreciate this part. But for every toxic fan, there were legitimate and ridiculous and really incredible dark attacks on me and my family. I'm not justifying any bad behavior, but also I'm in this conversation with the fandom where I have tried to make the work as best I can. He also defends the fandom, but also gives a fair response as well in the Hollywood Reporter article. I like this comment that he says, the fandom has emerged in this strong way. They're not casual. I make movies with the motivation to create something for the fans where they get to care about it as much as possible. I think we definitely do. In the THR article, going back to talking about making a product at DC, he says, I never looked at it as the job, oh, I'm the architect of DC. I need to create entertainment for DC that sells toys, and that is for the masses and fun for everyone. He never looked at it that way. I didn't care about that. I liked Batman, I liked Superman, I wanted to make something cool. You picked the wrong guy if you wanted a product. Going back to talking about how Rebel Moon was originally, he had pitched it at one time as a Star Wars movie. He said, I thought that Star Wars was in a vulnerable state, so I thought I had a chance. They found out that, Disney was buying Lucasfilm. He said that he was bummed, but Deborah was overjoyed. He said that she never wanted this to go to Lucasfilm. She told him, you think you have a hard time with DC? You think you're mad at them because they won't let you do what you want? What do you think Star Wars is going to be? When it fell apart, she was like, this is the best thing that could have happened to you. And I think she definitely was on point with that. Now it's easy to say that because we know what happened, in hindsight. But I think at the time, she was right about that. And this is interesting. I did not know. It said that the project morphed into a TV show for a while, and it says each episode was going to focus on the recruitment of one character into a band of rebels to take on an evil galactic empire. Then the project changed again back to a feature, this time with an almost 200-page script about a group of outlaws and peasants led by a fearless female protagonist who rise up to protect their peaceful moon settlement from a tyrannical region. I didn't know that they had at one point talked about making it into a series. I didn't know that. This part of the article was very interesting to me. When talking about 300, Zack said that after opening weekend, Tom Cruise called him and was congratulating him on this, the opening weekend success of 300. And I found that very interesting because before The Flash came out, Warner Brothers was pushing this narrative that Tom Cruise had got this private screening of The Flash, that they flew it out to his house on a hard drive, a thumb drive, because they didn't, you know what I mean? And it was like this one person sat there and waited for him to watch the movie, and then he made a call and was in love with the movie and said it was one of the best movies, like really hyping that up. Zack, like he mentions in this article, he didn't have anything to do with Warner Brothers or anything like that, but a year earlier had invited Snyder for breakfast at his Beverly Hills home after being blown away by the trailer and wanted to pick his brain about making the film. And then when the movie came out, he called him to congratulate him about the opening weekend. I just found that very interesting that Zack shared this, which I didn't know anything about this before, but Warner Brothers was really pushing this whole Tom Cruise thing before The Flash came out. There were conflicting things about that because people said that at the time he no longer lived in this Beverly Hills home that's mentioned here. And so it didn't really make sense. The whole thing, as soon as that came out, I found it very strange because it just seemed like a weird thing to put out there about The Flash. But now that Zack is sharing this, it makes it even more weird that Warner Brothers would put that out there and say that. I don't know. And talking more about the whole Justice League experience, I like, and BVS, DC in general, I like what Zack said here. He said, we cared deeply about what we were doing. We weren't trying to make an Avengers movie. We weren't. We didn't know how, quite frankly. They brought someone in that did. I've never seen the Whedon version, but it wasn't the answer. Plain and simple. And Deborah says it took a toll. Like, it was amazing to come up with a new Superman and to bring Wonder Woman to the big screen for the first time. There were so many amazing moments. Then at the end, there were so many heartbreaking moments. And that kind of echoes what Zack was saying in the Wired article about doing what he loved and making this, thing that he loved, and then everything turned its back on them. It felt like very much echoes. Those two comments really echo each other, and it's sad. And here he is again talking about the fandom and what they have done for AFSP. Zack has always talked about his appreciation for that. He said, I'm not going to comment on the details of whether they are good or bad, but whether they're toxic or bullying, that's in every chat room. It's what comes with the internet. But I do know that the work they did on some level was good. I can say for a fact that they did good. That is undeniable. And he's always been very protective of that. As far as the whole thing about bots being used in the Snyder Cut movement, he said, the truth is it doesn't matter, the movie got made. If they were smart enough to employ bots in this thing, then they won. That movie has no business existing, and it does. Which that whole bots thing was ridiculous. They also asked him if he would ever return to DC or comic book movie genre, superhero genre. And he said that right now that chapter of his life is closed. It would be difficult to coax him into reopen it. If James Gunn called and invited him back to DC, he might consider doing a Dark Knight Returns adaptation, but quote, only a true representation of the graphic novel. If Marvel rang, he might think for a beat about a Daredevil and Electric movie. He's mentioned that on other podcasts too. Maybe adapting Frank Miller's Elektra Lives Again, but that's it, quote, he insists. What about Star Wars? No, I don't think so. Those guys have a handle on the brand, which he's doing that on his own now. He doesn't need, that wouldn't even make any sense. That'd be almost like competing against his own IP now that he's doing with Rebel Moon. I'm sorry if this video turned into, longer than usual, but I just wanted to cover both of those articles since they both came out within, 24 hours of each other, give or take. I just appreciate him being honest, but still respectful of, working in DC and everything that he's done over the past several years that, us fans have supported, and now what we're looking forward to for Rebel Moon. CCXP is starting soon. And again, the Rebel Moon Day for that is going to be December 1st. He said they're going to go, pretty big. Netflix is planning on doing it pretty big for that, what they have planned. I'm excited to hear about it. I wanted to cover those. And if you haven't got a chance, go online and read them if you're interested. But thank you guys for watching. Check out anything you might have missed over the past, a week or so on the channel and the short section if you're interested as well. Thank you guys for the support. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.